Hi, everyone. Are we almost ready to go live?
I believe so. We're ready.
Okay. Thank you for, coming here for this breakfast briefing. As you see, the title focuses on education and climate change. My name is Priya Joshi. I'm a senior research officer at the Global Education Monitoring Report at UNESCO. And I'm really so delighted to see so many familiar faces and also to meet so many new people who will become friends and colleagues, I'm sure. And also just to see the energy in the room of so many different people interested in this question of the interlinkages of education and climate change. We have a packed schedule, so let's get started. First, I want to give you a bit of an overview of why we're here, and then we'll greet our panelists. I start first with this assertion, right? We have an assertion that education is deeply important for all of the SDGs. At the GEM report, we have the international mandate to monitor global education, which is SDG 4, and its progress. And from the beginning of this global agenda, we have also been speaking on education's role in the SDGs. Our first report, the 2016 report, was on education for people and planet. And since then, we have been assessing the data and the evidence to highlight that education and progress and transformation is a must if we are to shape societies, right? So it's about the knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes that sort of shape individuals in ways that surely benefit all of the SDG outcomes, whether you think about gender equality or political participation or health outcomes. And we also stress the fact that education is critical for the professional capacity development for all sectors and their transitions. Think about judges and lawyers and solar workers, technicians, social workers, etc. You have it, right? So to some degree, we're talking about the world of learning, and I just want to say that we have always had a fairly broad sort of approach to thinking about education. We're talking about formal education, non-formal education, as well as informal learning that takes place, for example, through awareness-raising campaigns. Since 2016, what we find is that climate action has moved up the agenda. Of course, we know that this is out of necessity, more and more hottest days on records, as well as, I think, quite a lot of, substantial mobilization by young people. And in education, what we have found is that, that's my phone. Yeah, yeah, thank you. In education, what we find is that, thank you.
You're welcome.
Climate change education has actually moved up the agenda quite substantially. This is the work that we did together with the Monitoring Climate Change Education Project. Of the 80 countries we reviewed, almost everyone says that they have climate change education embedded in their primary and secondary curricula. Many countries say that they do communication and awareness programs. Of course, the quality and the depth of this, is debatable. But what we have assessed in our sort of analysis of data and evidence is that education remains quite underappreciated. There is, of course, conversation, which is growing, which is definitely a positive. When I was in Dubai this last year, you see sort of a chorus growing of people who say education matters for climate, and we have to pay attention to it. We have UNESCO's Greening Education Partnership. We have different kinds of networks. We have people in the room, right? Take Action Global, AFS Youth Assembly. Everyone has a kind of a bit of a climate agenda now. But there are three things here that I have mentioned that if you look at, we are also in the business of analyzing education finance. Education systems are chronically underfinanced in many low and middle income countries. And I think in the developed world, education funding has gone down quite a bit. What you find is that many school-age children are not learning the basics, which means, of course, it transfers to the rest of life. What you find is when you look at climate agendas, or even yesterday's conversation around SDG 13, the review of the climate agenda, climate sort of experts speak of the outcomes, right? So afforestation, they speak of renewable energy, they speak of water conservation, they speak of all of the outcomes, but besides a few exceptions, like Ireland was the exception that I noted yesterday, people are not speaking of the human transition it takes to make all of this happen. And so I feel, and one of the other reasons for this also might be that education systems have not transformed adequately. We hear youth saying this in schools and universities, that their education is inadequate. We hear teachers say that they're underprepared to make active climate education happen. We hear, often, time and again, employers say that we there's a real skills mismatch, a lack of climate readiness of their employees. And because we also speak quite a bit about evidence, that there's a real issue of understanding, right, that if you are providing climate education, if you are providing climate training, there's a lot of assumption that this will lead to behavior change, this will lead to different kinds of actions. But there's not enough research out there that's really being put together on this topic systematically and being used to convince people. So really, this new report that you have with you is framing all of these broad interlinkages. It assesses the evidence, it assesses the data. It makes 4 recommendations. The first point is about shifting the paradigm. And there are different ways that we need to shift the paradigm, one of which is moving away from cognitive learning solely to learning about sustainability through actions and experiences. We definitely think there needs to be a shift on research and evidence. We need to better understand whether such interventions are effective, are they changing behavior? When we do major communication and awareness raising programs, which many cities around the world do, many communities around the world do, we need to not just count numbers of people reached, but whether they're actually having more of an impact. And secondly, we talk about education as solution for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Here we're talking about the role of technical and vocational education, higher education, the fact that if someone is working from the climate sector perspective, are they budgeting for capacity and skills development adequately? So the human transition as we speak. The third point is about education sector requirements for climate financing, in the climate financing. In climate finance, the monies talked about sometimes go from billions to trillions quite easily. Some part of it should go to education. After all, we're talking about the people that will have to make this happen. And finally, we need to better monitor whatever we're doing. It seems there's a lot going on, including in curricula. We just don't know enough about that. So that's the setting of the stage. And one of the things that I have really pushed for in our team and in our conversations is to widen who we're talking to. It's quite easy to convince education people that education is important. Are we really speaking to a wider group? And we're so delighted that this paper was endorsed by, from UNDESA to the Columbia Climate School to Systems Change Lab, Mathematica, AFS Youth Assembly, and the World Wide Fund for Nature. And it's so nice to see so many of you here from those groups. So that's what I would say, this is my setting of the stage. This is what we see as the challenges and opportunities for education in climate conversations. I would like to invite the panel now to be seated. And if you look at, these are just the sort of where they come from. We're delighted to have a panel that speaks from a national perspective, a local perspective, a youth perspective, and global perspective. So very diverse groups here. Please. So we start with, I think, please, you can sit anywhere, really. Yeah. And I think we're still waiting for one of our speakers. So, Astra, you are at the other end from me, but you are the chief of the Integrated Policy Analysis Branch for the SDGs at UNDESA. Among the many interlinkages, projects, and processes that you manage, you handle the Global Sustainable Development Report, which talked about the synergies between education and climate, among many other SDGs. And of course, you have also just reviewed yesterday at the High-Level Political Forum, SDG 13. So could you elaborate a little on the UNDESA perspective on the role education must play in advancing climate action, drawing on GSDR as well as the review processes? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, and it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you to UNESCO for bringing us all together in this very nice space, Scandinavia House, with thanks to Sweden for hosting. Let me start by giving maybe a little bit of background on the Global Sustainable Development Report, because this in itself is, I think, an advance for the role of education across the SDGs. My office at UNDESA, the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, supports the Global Sustainable Development Report. And this is a report that was requested by member states. In 2016, it was requested to be written by an independent group of scientists. These scientists are appointed by the Secretary General, and they really draw from the natural sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, from all regions. So it's very much a multidisciplinary report. It's meant to be an assessment of assessments. So the purpose is really to bring together the state-of-the-art research in the science community broadly on the SDGs, so that when the SDG Summit takes place every 4 years, that's when the report is launched. It can be there to inform the discussions of leaders on progress toward the SDGs, but even more importantly on what the evidence is showing in terms of what types of actions can accelerate progress and help to tackle some of the longstanding impediments to SDG implementation. The first report then by the scientists was launched in 2019 at the SDG Summit. And it really, one of the most important messages from that report was to underscore that the way forward would really depend on transforming economic and social systems, that business as usual or small steps forward were really not going to be sufficient for the kinds of transformative change the 2030 Agenda was calling for. The other key message was that integrated approaches to action would be absolutely crucial. And the basis for this perspective was evidence showing that focusing on one goal at a time, I mean, everyone is comfortable with one goal and can focus there, but it's not going to be enough. And so achieving results across the agenda would require understanding how goals are interlinked, where some of the synergies can be tapped into and harnessed, where progress on one goal can be tackled in a way that also advances progress on other goals. And maybe even more importantly, how to tackle trade-offs, because we know that approaching a goal in a particular way may have detrimental effects on a different goal. Maybe approaching economic growth in a particular way can have impacts on gender equality that would not be what you'd be looking for. So really understanding and mapping those interlinkages is crucial, and that's where the analysis that UNESCO has carried out on the links between education and climate action is so important. One of the examples in the GSDR looked at school meal programs and how they can be synergistic in terms of supporting good nutrition for children, health, SDG 3, and then school enrollment, SDG 4. So these are those spaces where multiple goals can be addressed at the same time. On the other hand, scaling up food production without paying attention to fresh water use, without paying attention to climate emissions coming from fertilizer use, could have detrimental impacts if those aren't taken into account. So the GSDR really focuses on providing entry points where these sets of goals can be tackled at the same time. And one of those entry points is investing in human well-being and building capabilities, with the understanding that investing in people and their well-being and their education and capabilities is fundamental to addressing all of the goals. The 2023 GSDR looks further at the latest research on interlinkages because it's really taken off. There's a lot of research taking place. And they identify SDG 4 with several other goals as having very strong synergies, not quite as many trade-offs to worry about, but synergies across the SDGs. And so that's one of the areas where investments can really have widespread impacts. Just to make a final comment on this, with only 6 years left until 2030, the latest data says only 17% of the goals of the targets with data are on track to be achieved. So the message really is that tapping into these areas where there's a potential for finding synergies is even more important. So building the knowledge, for example, that can spur changes in behaviors and climate action will really be crucial to both the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. I would just quickly mention one other message from the GSDR, and that is that transformations like this and the systemic approach needs to be rooted in context-specific analysis. So education in lower income countries and middle income countries that can inform context-specific analysis of these interlinkages. We know that education can help with climate action. That might look different in a different country, a different region, and countries with different income levels. So investing in education, research and development, science in all spaces is really important to making sure that policies can be informed by local level knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Astra. I feel the last point, context specificity, really makes me think about intersectionality of needs. You know, the fact that a situation of poverty and other kinds of challenges that sort of combine with environmental challenges is a very different situation in many lower income countries compared to higher income countries. Yesterday we heard so much about the fact that so many countries who didn't do much to the world are actually suffering from the problems of climate change so much more. So clearly there's a lot of tension here in the links between climate and economic growth, and we have to definitely look at that. But thank you so much for your finding around education and for being here and endorsing this report. It means a lot to us. So pivoting from this global overview and the GSDR, we now move to a national perspective. I turn to Ambassador Camilla Melander, Consul General of Sweden in New York. Thank you so much for hosting us in this lovely space. And Ambassador, as I just mentioned to you, I've always been thoroughly impressed with how Sweden presents itself at the high-level political forum. There is sort of a real energy around around how it takes local action, how it takes global action on the SDGs, and also how the dots are connected across sectors. So could you please explain to us why education runs at the heart of the SDGs for Sweden, and also how Sweden is championing climate action and climate education nationally and globally? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. I am very happy that we could be here at Scandinavia House. This is something we share with our Nordic neighbors. And yes, actually, climate change is something that runs very deep in Sweden. I would say it started already when I was growing up as a child in Sweden in the 1970s. Sweden was then not a very clean country, but we realized that we could not keep on just using the resources of nature and polluting. So a program was introduced called Keep Sweden Clean, and it informed all of us children how long it took for waste to disintegrate in nature. So a plastic bottle, 450 years, a chewing gum, 25 years, a plastic bag, 400 years. So you would not see anyone in my generation throwing anything in nature or even in the streets. It's very much frowned upon. And we never had to introduce fines like in Singapore for throwing a cigarette butt, because through education we learned that we have a planet and we need to preserve it. So I would say education was so important for my whole generation. Now looking at the next generation, my children, The issues of climate concern are very much introduced in the Swedish curriculum. I can just look at my 2 children. They would never walk out of a room without turning off the light. They would never turn on the dishwasher with just a few plates in it, or the washing machine with just a few pieces of clothes, because because they know how much water and energy goes into that process. So it means that we have now 2 generations that are very climate conscious, and we see that there are so many challenges. But that has not led to us being paralyzed. Rather, it has spurred entrepreneurship. I would say we have changed our society, more or less. We don't have landfills anymore. We use our waste to produce biogas, and our buses and cars are running on biogas. Our waters used to be very polluted. Sorry. But now we can actually drink the water that runs through the center of Stockholm, and people fish there. And we have introduced, for the first time ever in history, a way to produce steel without any CO2 emissions. Steel is a very polluting process. It accounts for 10% of all CO2 emissions all around the world. It's produced with coal. We are now producing it with green hydrogen instead. So this is a game changer. And I would say that education in Sweden has led to not only citizens being very informed, but our companies are very informed and very entrepreneurial. So the companies are the front runners. They actually think the government, which I represent, is far behind. The companies are spurring this change. So I would say that through education, you are actually achieving some real changes that do matter. So I just want to underscore how important I think this panel is, and how important it is that our next generation will keep on keeping this planet a place where we can all continue to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a concrete discussion, and also about how it takes time, right? It takes time to educate, and it takes time to get that social norm around climate, around behaving in a green way, I guess. Thank you so much again. From sort of the concrete action at the national level, of a whole of society approach almost, we now turn to this question of what I mentioned earlier, the need to build climate mitigation and adaptation capacities. When we were reviewing the evidence, we found that there's not a lot of understanding on whether providing capacity building training or skills programs is actually can be directly attributed to changing practices. And we're delighted now to turn to Neeraj Kumar Negi, a Senior Evaluation Officer from the Global Environmental Facility. Neeraj, the GEF serves as a financial mechanism for several environmental conventions and is a major source of financing for many projects on climate change adaptation and mitigation, especially in low and middle income countries. Could you share from your experience on how these projects are engaging on awareness, raising, training, skills development needs, and how are you evaluating the impacts of these on behavioral change or capacity? Thank you.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you, Sweden, for also being our donor country, and also UNESCO for organizing this event. Just a brief about GEF. GEF was established in 1991. It's a multilateral organization that provides support to developing countries to address environmental challenges. So far, it has provided $25 billion, out of which more than $10 billion is to address climate change. It works through 18 agencies. 5 of these happen to be UN agencies. In my talk, I will try to provide you a flavor of how we use education and capacity development to address climate change through behavior change. So we look at it through the prism of behavior change, and much of the focus is on also learning by doing. So you undertake activities that have not been undertaken before, and through that you develop a community of practitioners that know how to do stuff. Jeff uses several levers with its projects implicitly aim at behavior change. 40% of these do so explicitly through their objectives. The levers include awareness and also capacity development. Other levers include legal and regulatory changes. Then we also include measures like grants, subsidies, taxes, and fees that trying to change behavior. We support multi-stakeholder interactions so that the key stakeholders regularly interact, collaborate, and are in a gain practice of doing so. So that's very important. In many of these issues, you need to work on it again and again, repeatedly, so that people get into a habit of working with each other. So bringing them together. Then most projects that we have some knowledge creation and sharing activities. And this focus not only is at the project level, but also is evident at our global programs and corporate approaches. So our global programs on sustainable cities and on forest restoration have established knowledge networks, knowledge platforms at the global scale. We also, as a major climate fund, participate in communities of practice that share knowledge and learn from each other's experience. So we have Green Climate Fund, climate investment funds, adaptation funds. So we have a network and platform to meet regularly and share each other's experiences. Coming to private sector is very crucial for JEF activities. 90% of our projects seek to engage with private sector in one form or the other. Usually they are hosts of many of the demonstrations that we take up, and through this they gain experience of doing new things, adopting new technologies. They are also co-investors in these activities. They are beneficiaries of our training and capacity development activities. And they also help us shape regulatory and legal changes that affect their work, and also, by definition, are subject of these changes. JEF also has a blended finance window, which seeks to raise private capital, and usually it's in areas where investment has not gone in, but there is a potential to do so, but there is lack of knowledge about risks involved and lack of information. So JEF tries to reduce those risks through its non-grant instruments that reduce these risks for the private actors, and private actors gain experience by implementing things on ground, and this knowledge gap reduces and the market develops further. I also come to youth engagement. JEF recognizes young people as valuable partners for climate action. Its small grant program provides grant for local action to try micro projects at local small scale. It also provides them representation in the national steering committees, which is very important to develop them as leaders and help them learn with development leaders at the national level. JEF also supports their participation in the climate COPs so that they have exposure to how climate negotiations take place. Coming to results assessment, we try to see how these activities were performing, especially the projects. So some shocking findings. Only 55% of the projects that say they aim at behavior change actually include an indicator to do so. So JEF partnership includes many multilateral agencies, including 5. So that's the situation. People don't give as much attention to specifying indicators to actually track these changes. Then 1 out of 6 projects you find even if you have specified those indicators, you don't report on it. So despite these gaps, some things are quite clear. Successful projects address specific needs and motivations of the targeted stakeholders. Effective projects use participatory and systems-based approaches for behavior change. And behavior change is more likely when benefits of action are clearly understood, and so are the costs of inaction. So when these are understood, and then messages that you try to give evoke more response when they are personalized, personally relevant, and have emotional appeal to the targeted people. I conclude by emphasizing importance of use of multiple approaches for behavior change and learning by doing, and strategies to improve monitoring and evaluation in projects so that we know what's working and what's not. So.
Thank you so much, Neeraj, for your feedback, for the comprehensive approach that you're taking, and also for stressing that 55% number, that even when you're intending to do behavior change, if you're not tracking it, you're not really, you won't have the numbers to verify whether what you're doing is working. So that's also quite important. Thank you so much. Moving from this, the funding and monitoring of capacities part, I had mentioned this paradigm shift earlier. And at the GEM report, we've highlighted the need for a paradigm shift from cognitive learning to social and emotional learning and action, and also for more rigorous research on climate action. Our next speaker is Jennifer Williams, who's the director of Take Action Global. It's an institution that has really created a truly global network of teachers, students, and advocacy partners working at this intersection of climate education and student action. Jennifer, first, I just want to thank you for all of your engagement with the GEM report and all of your support with our issues. I think it would be great to hear from you on the ways that Take Action Global ensures that students and teachers are engaging outside of the school with communities and networks and nonprofits to bolster climate action. And I also want you to sort of comment on this. There's an assumption that climate action approaches will change behavior. Are you actually tracking this? Are you trying to fill that research gap in any way? Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. Yeah. And thank you so much, Ambassador, for having us today. I am thrilled to be here and representing teachers and students from all around the world. I am the director of a nonprofit organization committed to climate education for all. So we are working in over 160 countries with teachers who are teaching across every content area and every grade level. So on behalf of them, we're honored to be here today and to share some stories and some learnings that we've had in our work on supporting classrooms to take action. So we have been integrating the UN SDGs into the work of curricula since 2016. And of course, we have our very own goal in SDG 4, which I think a lot of us in the education space, that was an entry point for us, but we soon found that there were many other of the global goals where we were focused on our work. So we had teachers saying, we're doing work every day around poverty and gender, life on land, life underwater. So my background actually isn't in environmental science and climate change. I was a literacy specialist, so working more on the communication side. So I would never have expected to land in the world of climate action education. But as we were doing the work around the SDGs, we started to find this intersection of SDG 4 and SDG 13, climate action, one that was critical. Not only because of the urgent need of our planet, but also this is what we were hearing for young people. And so today I'm pleased to share on some of the research that we've been doing. We are constantly learning. There is so much to learn, especially with this being a global conversation. And then also some stories from the classroom. So starting with educators first and education. And what we saw early on were some themes. So first of all, we saw that climate action education in schools was very uneven. So globally, there were pockets of progress, but it was very subjective, depending on the teacher who was teaching it, the school it was in, the country, even here in the United States, it varies state to state, of course. We were also seeing that it was lacking coherence. So we weren't seeing vertical and horizontal alignment. So maybe a student would be in a classroom where they had a fantastic year, bringing in a focus on the environment, nature, climate action, but that might end as they move on to another classroom. Then the final observation that we had for us that was most concerning was this focus on consumption over action, which was a big fear of ours. We are not wanting to see our students just reading about climate change in textbooks. We want them to be able to be empowered to take action right alongside their teachers, which what a great topic for our classroom teachers to be able to lock arms with students and vulnerably say, I might not be an expert in this, but we can work together to figure out ways forward. So understanding those observations and also understanding where our teachers were coming from, we saw these big themes around identity and around leadership. So first with identity with teachers. We have a lot of teachers in the room today, which I'm thrilled that we have teachers and students represented in this conversation, and I know joining online. But typically what happens in education, you see your identity in your role, maybe based on your college courses, your degree, what someone else has assigned to you. You will be teaching 4th grade. So with a lot of our educators, unless they were in an environmental science classroom, they didn't necessarily identify as a climate action educator. So this is really where we start, talking about that everyone, anywhere, can be a climate action educator. So it's not just reserved for those high school science classes. We work with teachers who work with early childhood students all the way up through university, across every content area. Some of the bright spots for us have been arts educators, world language teachers. I'll share a story of a teacher that really challenged my assumptions because he came to us and wanted to be a climate champion, is what we called them. And he was a PE coach. And I was first like, how is this connection gonna play out? And so I asked for a conversation with him, Andrew in California. And so he started to tell me about the work that he does as a PE coach and that climate change, in his words, affects him more than any other teacher because the weather that he is faced with every day, he's out in nature and he has the ability to really bring some of these topics to light. So Andrew, then really looking at his new identity, also amplified as a leader. So maybe not someone you would necessarily assume would be a climate action leader in this space, but someone that we were able to see quite quickly was able to do that. So it's not just reserved for teachers as climate action educators, another assumption that was challenged for me. I have started to see community members in informal settings or unexpected settings emerge as climate action educators. We're very proud of the work we do in New York City, right here in the backyard of the United Nations, with the New York City Mayor's Office, New York City Public Schools, students here represented today. And we got very interested early on in this connection with city leadership, and most specifically with mayors and our youth. And so it's not just reserved for classrooms. We have an annual event. It's called Climate Action Day. It's an event online for students. And in 2020, I think it was our first event, we had the mayor of Freetown from Sierra Leone join. And she was sharing about her commitment as a climate action educator. And so she deemed Freetown Tree Town, and they were going to plant 1 million trees. And so they did this with $0 budget, and she knew that she was going to need a lot of support to do this. So finding ways to not just plant trees in pockets around her city, but to have people take on the role as a tree steward and plant, guide the growth process, document, and so they were able to document all of the trees that they were planting. So I don't know if she ever realized that she was a climate action educator, but in her role as a mayor, she was guiding these community members. Finally, I'll end with, I think what we're all here for is students and youth, our biggest hope for the future. And for me, I've been a lifelong educator, and I have seen that early positive experiences with fill in the blank leads you to have students taking action for that, whatever you fill in the blank. So a story from me as a parent, which I think parents are another group that we need to carefully consider. We were doing virtual exchange, which if you've been through Zoom meetings in the last 4 years, this is something that we do in education, class-to-class virtual exchange. So cultural exchange is where students are working with people who live and look differently from them in a different part of the world. So we were early in the conversation around virtual exchange. My daughter's now 18, but I was a principal of her school, and she was 4 at the time, and we were doing virtual exchange. And she had been paired with 3 classrooms. We're in Florida, a classroom in Michigan, a classroom in Turkey, and a classroom in Nigeria. And so they went through games. It was called Games They Play, and they taught each other games that they play in their area. And then months later, my little 4-year-old Grace, we were walking through an airport, and she pointed to a map, and she pointed to Turkey, and she was like, "Oh, Turkey, I have friends in Turkey." And so my family was like, "No, you don't. You've never been to Turkey. You don't have friends in Turkey." But for Grace, that early experience with a different culture, a different person that she could use to help her move forward with that positive experience now impacts her today. So if she meets someone from Turkey, she has that grounding. I think the same for nature, though. And this is the easiest thing, I think, for us to be able to do, just create positive experiences for our young people with nature. And that's a great start for any teacher in any classroom, just to get outside, appreciate the wonderful things that are already happening, especially in a time when we're talking about climate change, when there can be a lot of gloom and doom. So we appreciate place-based learning, which I know you've done a lot of work with, Priya, these informal settings, so looking at urban areas, community settings, museums. So climate action education can be anywhere, and it needs to be a part of every part of our days, not just us, but also our youth. So I'll conclude with just a call to action for us, and we are committed to research. I think you asked about that, Priya, and my fellow panelists were alluding to this. I think that we have definitely some deficits in the area of research around climate action education. We have a lot of qualitative data. We have stories that we can tell for days, but we need to be able to document this, share this out with others. We have great exemplars. New Jersey, we have educators from New Jersey, the first state in the United States to mandate climate education for every student. And now we have other states looking to New Jersey, wondering how do we move forward? How can we do those types of things? So we're committed to research. We have our climate action project in the fall where we're able to do pre and post questions with our teachers. So we'd love to get feedback from you on the questions we should be asking. And we're excited to report on that come November at COP. So thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the hope and also for the research. So we look forward to that. I want to give now another word, give the mic now to Tasneem Tabassum, who's a youth leader on climate education, who's currently an NYU student. Tasneem, we all know that young people are branded as the leaders of climate education and action, and they're credited with moving the political agenda forward, and also demanding that governments and powerful corporations do better. At the same time, I feel that youth leadership is often paid lip service. They're visible, but maybe not heard enough in policy conversations. So as I pass the floor to you, I would just like you to speak about the role of youth advocacy for climate commitments and how you think education plays a part. Thank you.
So I'm so grateful to be here. This is actually my first time being in a panel like this, and I'm just so grateful that I could actually talk about the SDGs and my experience with Jennifer. So I remember actually it was during senior year, which was my first time actually learning about the SDGs. And I remember Jennifer actually pulling up pictures from my own country. So it was like from Bangladesh, pulling up pictures of students who were unable to actually receive proper education. So there were like students standing outside instead of having proper chairs to learn in. And I remember I just thought this was something that was only related to poverty, and it's not something that the youth could really focus on. And instead, I just thought, maybe adults should take action on this. I mean, what can we possibly really do? So I thought the internship would really go by quick, just assuming that, we just had to focus on a project on climate action. I mean, how hard could it be? Not really knowing that we really needed a lot of months to actually focus on what SDG really is. And I would say it really shifted my mindset. So we started with creating various projects that would allow both the youth and adults to step in and become leaders and educating others about climate change. So I remember we were actually into breakouts with certain groups, and we also had to focus with other students from different schools, just coming together and focusing on what we love to do. Personally, I love, obviously, to photograph and actually creating videos. And I know there were other students who also had the same hobbies as mine. So we actually came together and decided we're going to actually draft an app where a lot of people could have access to learning more about climate change. So we worked on actually creating surveys and questionnaire and videos. And other people also made animation that will lead to more awareness about climate change. I remember there was also different people just coming in. We had Zoom with, such as someone who did programming and how we could use programming in order to learn more about the SDGs and focus more on our projects. We also went to the United Nations, which definitely increased my awareness with the SDGs much more. So currently in college, I am learning more about the SDGs, which was really surprising to me. So I am a nursing major, and being part of a seminar that prepares us to become leaders in a community means understanding the SDG and its impact on each of us. The only problem that I actually saw coming from my cohort was that it's only open to certain students. And I thought, it should not be like this way, because SDG is really important to every nursing student. And I believe everyone should understand what it means to actually have an impact, to actually learn about the climate change in order to become a nursing student. And I remember in one of my classes, we briefly discussed about controversies where we focused on a topic that is normalized in our generation. And to me, this was a perfect time to talk about consumerism, as Jennifer has mentioned. So our generation actually relies too much on goods that leads to overexploitation of natural resources. For example, practicing fashion trends that are storming up all the time leads to the use of turnover clothes that just leads to textile waste and the disposal of these textile waste, which also releases greenhouse gases and toxic substances. So as a nursing student, I believe that it's time to debunk what we know about climate change and focus on what part we could play in these type of situations. I also think it's important to emphasize the importance of advocating for vulnerable populations and promoting social justice. And this is obviously linked to understanding that climate change leads to inequalities and affects vulnerable populations a lot. Education, hunger, and poverty also impacts vulnerable groups, and just going into college literally shifted my mindset so much. And I also took a lot of classes that really didn't really relate to my major, which I think brought in a lot of awareness. One of them was definitely nutrition and health, where we learned more about the My Plate, as one of the panelists have mentioned. And I remember on the My Plate, it's really specific as to what type of food we should be eating. But one thing that we really focus on how good milk was for certain groups, and not knowing that milk was something that was forced into certain minority groups, such as like South Asians and East Asians, who believed that, we should be drinking milk just because in America a lot of people are doing so. And so what that taught me is that we should just take advantage of what we have rather than focusing on what everyone else is doing, and that we should be also doing the same. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tasneem, for really emphasizing the importance of learning, and learning and growing with your learning. And I cannot agree with you more. Like, all of us here are lifelong learners, so I hope, and we all hopefully have learned something today. Today, I now give the floor to our final speaker. And before I give the floor to her, I just want to say that it's important that we have her as the final speaker because many of us have heard this, that change is happening at the local level, right? That the cities are actually at the forefront of climate action. Whether you look at Buenos Aires or Curitiba or Montreal or Copenhagen or even Dakar, many cities have become a vital spot for engagement across communities, businesses, universities, and they're often engaging in many different ways on this challenge, and they're engaging in ways that are trying to embed education and sustainability into the city's ethos. New York City is making a serious effort in championing green education and sustainable development. So we are delighted to have Aissata Mbe Kamara, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Policy and Strategic Initiatives and Chief of Staff at the New York City Mayor's Office of International Affairs with us. Among her many efforts, Deputy Commissioner Kamara has led the New York City effort behind the voluntary local process, review process for the SDGs. And the question I leave you with, and please come to the podium, in your role, you're providing international policy guidance to New York City agencies. You're also helping strengthen New York City's strategic leadership on the global stage. Could I ask you to elaborate on how New York City is, and the other cities you are working with, are harnessing awareness raising and campaigns to address climate change? Thank you so much.
Well, good morning to you. If there are educators in the room, you have my heart. I wish I could have been an educator, but with our program, Junior Ambassadors, I feel like I am one of you. So all educators here, you are heroes. Let me start by acknowledging our distinguished guests, our esteemed colleagues, our friends, and especially the Take Action Global team. They've become really, really close friends, and Suad, who I've worked with for so many years through the United Nations. So good to see you, my friend. It's really an honor to speak with you at this significant event on the margins of the UN High-Level Political Forum. And I saw some of you last night because we were hosting an event on artificial intelligence, but I also feel like this conversation is really, really important. And that's why, on behalf of Mayor Eric Adams, our administration, and myself, we found it very important for us to be here and to be part of this discussion. Listen, climate change is one of the biggest threats that New York City faces. We have seen time and time again that when we have different hurricanes, different superstorms, that it not only has financial ramifications for our city, it also has real life ramifications in that we end up losing New Yorkers. So our administration, we've really made it a priority to be at the forefront of climate action and to ensure that our young people are also a part of those discussions. Globally, we are all at a tipping point, and our actions today will be determining the future that we're going to be leaving for our generations to come. And it's really important that we put education at the center of this battle, because equipping individuals with the knowledge and the skills and values necessary to address and mitigate the impacts of climate will really ensure that we're able to win this challenge. However, education alone is not going to be enough. We really have to invest in the ways that we engage our youth, and we have to invest in the ways that we engage our communities to understand the future ramifications of climate change. Young people are not only the most affected by climate change, but they are also the most innovative and passionate people that want to find solutions. I know this because we work with about 800 educators and students annually, and you could really see the passion and the creativity that they bring to the talks about climate change. You know, when I was hired in 2015, in the mayor's office, I was tasked with trying to build a relationship between the United Nations and New York City. And the first group that I thought needed to be a part of that relationship was young people. And that's when we started New York City Junior Ambassadors. And Suad, who's in this room, has worked with me for so many years to ensure that we're building that bridge. But when we think about young people and the ways that we are empowering them, we often think of them as future leaders, that they are going to take over. And we need to change that perspective. We need to think of them as the leaders of now. They really have to be put at the seat of decision making, and they need to be allowed to work with us to be able to make change. And we've seen this clearly in the New York City Junior Ambassadors Program. The moment that we taught them about the SDGs, that we gave them the stipends, they are doing community cleanup. They are going and advocating to elected officials. They're raising their voices and showing that they're not going to be ignored. So really, all that young people need is a pathway and opportunity to be able to engage. And that is the reason why, as an administration, we really want to commit and continue to work with young people to make this work. Educators, you are literally shaping the future, and you are critical to the work that we do. In all the cities that I work with on climate, we always talk about educators, we always talk about young people, and how you are the ones that really have the pulse on the work that needs to be done. So again, thank you for having me today. Thank you for being in New York City if you're not from here. While you're here, we hope that you'll check out the many climate projects that we have. And if you ever have any questions, I'm always happy to answer. Okay? Thank you. Have a great, wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deputy Commissioner. I think we have heard from all of our stellar speakers, and we have a little bit of time for discussion. And I feel, I think that should be the slide, but I feel, what we will do is we'll just maybe hear from you for 10, 15 minutes, and then give the panel a minute each to, wrap up their reflections. I think we have said that many of us, in the SDG business will talk about the financing gap, a lack of money, a lack of money, a lack of money. So the way we sort of framed this question was, what do we need to do beyond the financing gap? So if you could give your comments on that, that would be great. And I think the second thing, because this is a learning experience, what did you learn today? So please raise your hands, or just stand up and speak if you'd like. Please go ahead. Sorry, could you just wait for the mic?
Hi, my name is Heather Rubin, and I work with the NICET Office of Bilingual Education World Languages. We had a conversation earlier related to how to really shift education, and we said it's not about the consumption of the information, which was mentioned earlier. It's really about the strategies, the instructional strategies, which are not action-oriented, which are not project-based. And we see that shift in New York State now. We're moving towards that. But I think that's really critical to start talking about how we teach, not so much about what we teach, because we want the students to be engaged.
Thank you for that. How we teach and not what we teach, please. Just a minute. The mic, could we pass the mic? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Sandy Hecka, Life Project for Youth based in Paris. That's my NGO, which I'm from here, by the way. ECOSOC Chamber is going to have Transforming Education, which will address your comment. Anyway, this is global. How are each of you going to bring into the United Nations September, which is happening during this General Assembly, which I will be there, the SDG Summit? What strategy are you going, especially as science, which I've attended, like yesterday, there was Science Day this week, the information given today on a global basis at the SDG Summit, as well as the World Summit in 2025?
All right, a couple more hands, please. Yeah, down there.
Good morning. I'm Diane Malloy. I run the Science Technology Entry Program out of med school. And one quick comment, but more of a question for you, Thasneem. One of the things that you said that really struck me was I took a class not related to what I was doing, and it was nutrition. And one of the things I discuss in medical school education is they don't take nutrition courses as a preventative action. It's all about learning about their symptoms, et cetera. one of the things that I do, I work with underserved middle and high school students, is to get them to critically think, and that's how I teach. And the districts love what I do because it's outside of the curriculum of what they have to teach. And I teach climate change and its effect on global public health. And one of the things I say, even though I'm an oceanographer and there's all different aspects of climate change, the heat is going to get you first. And this is what's going to happen. If you can comment in your time as to how your education is preparing you to help patients that you have that have been affected by climate change. Thank you.
So actually,
Okay, let's just see if we have some more comments, and then we'll give the opportunity to the whole panel. Please.
Hi, I'm Dia. I'm from Mathematica, and I'm actually a climate and health researcher, so that's a question that I'm very interested in as well. One of the observations, and I guess something I'd love to learn more about, that in addition to that insufficient funding gap, I'm curious to understand more so what the challenges and opportunities could be around monitoring and evaluating the interventions and the programs that you're designing, because I'm hearing that we want to learn more about what's effective and what can change behavior, and I'm curious how we're growing that sort of knowledge base.
Great questions. I think we have one more. Are we? Should we call it a wrap up? Oh, two more. All right, go ahead.
So as an educator, one of the things that I find is that it's less finance and more time that is the issue for education. I mean, teachers have a great interest, students have a greater interest, especially recently, which is terrific. And the real problem is just finding time to integrate it into curriculum. So that's always the challenge for us as educators. So if anyone could speak to that.
Sorry.
Hello, I didn't mean to be standing and speaking. I'll sit down. Hi, everyone, and my name is Nikki Levinson Angulo. I'm the Deputy Chief of Organization Development at AFS Intercultural Programs. I oversee the AFS Youth Assembly, which is very excited and proud to endorse this report, and also Pri, you're going to be, I think, joining us at our event in August. In terms of just making first, and thank you to everyone on the panel, this was fascinating. Just making a comment on the first one in terms of what it would take. I think at AFS, we really focus on active global citizenship, which is more than anything else about like a mindset, right? How do you get people, if you want people to care about education and talking about these things, first they have to be able to think beyond just their local community and be able to like connect that back up to the fact that we're all living on one small and very delicate blue planet. And you know, your kids in Sweden and an NYU student, right? Like being able to say my local nursing career actually connects back up to the SDGs. So I think that mindset is so important and a big part of what it would take. And I just wanted to comment in terms of learning stuff from today's discussions. I really love the point about synergies and just finding places of synergies because that's so efficient, right? And we hope that things like the Youth Assembly, which is taking place in New York City in just 1 month, are places where those synergies happen and where you can come to conclusions or work together across different projects and make progress much faster. So again, thank you to UNESCO and to the GEM report for this fascinating work.
All right. I think we've had a lot of interesting questions and comments, and I guess we close the. Are there any online questions at all? No. All right. Great. So I give the floor. Maybe we're starting with Tasneem, work our way back, and please go ahead for any of the comments, any of the questions.
Yeah, of course. So relating back to what you have said about nutrition and health, I'm actually really lucky that in college we actually get to take courses that in high school I didn't really have access to. Depending on what high school you go to, whether it's small or big, everyone has different opportunities and different perspective. But in college, I know that everyone has similar perspective depending on which route we want to go into. So I know that with nutrition and health, it really gave me much more aware into African disparities and, like I mentioned, South Asian disparities. And one thing that I wish I had access to as a senior in high school was actually getting the opportunity to study abroad. I know that there are some kids from my own school that actually got to go with the actual mayor and they're part of the SYLC, where they got to actually learn more about education while visiting different states. Even though that's not a whole country, it's a state, they're still getting more exposure on what education means. And right now, I'm currently thinking about studying abroad, whether that's in Abu Dhabi or Ghana. I know that even in Abu Dhabi, it's not really only about the people that are in there, but some courses that they have is definitely African disparity and its held. And I know that even if I cannot go to Ghana and actually work with the actual people there and help them, I know that I could still be taking courses that would allow me to understand the language barrier, the culture barrier, and just allow them to actually understand SDGs and actually learn more about climate change by myself. Sometimes I think it's not always about volunteering and taking the action immediately, but rather focusing on and actually learning more about it rather than actually taking action first. So yeah.
Thank you for those comments. So I heard some themes around pedagogy and also some challenges that we face as educators. This is something we really take seriously in trying to better understand, as we have teachers that are inundated with one more thing. So it's like, all right, do I do this just to check the box? And so what we found, particularly in the United States, is a tendency towards looking at climate action education through a problem-solution lens. So we have students that will identify problems, and then they'll sticky board it out, and they'll come up with all these different possible solutions. What we found in working with our global community, that this is a very Western type of approach, because some of our other partners may be able to identify problems for days, but might not have those same resources for solutioning. So what we do from the beginning is an asset-based community development approach. A few of my panelists also mentioned systems-level approaches as well. And I think it is where we can come together to really address some of these complex problems. So in an asset-based approach, instead of looking for the deficits, it's looking for what is working and building on that. So for a lot of our schools, even if it's small things, but identifying those bright spots and saying, we've been doing this really tiny community garden, and we're so proud of it. Okay, well, how can we build that out? How maybe can you focus on storytelling this year? So that's been our approach that we've really been leaning into with our schools. I'd love to also just use my time as I wrap up just to express how excited I am to see so many teachers and students represented here, even just in this room. I know when I started in conversations around the UN SDGs, the United Nations and the Visitor Center really prioritizing teachers, and so now we're starting to see the prioritization of bringing educators, bringing youth voices in, and not just the ones that are leading the efforts. It's everyday teachers that are trying to figure it out. And I think I would encourage us all to find ways to do that. So again, thank you to UNESCO for welcoming us today.
Yeah, I will respond to Dia's question regarding M&E. So with M&E, I think the challenge is not really about what needs to be done, but more about doing it. So some things that need to be done may take into account the existing knowledge, what we already know. You need to have better designed interventions, a clear theory of change. You need to also understand the systems that you are trying to influence and what all are involved there. Then you need to design better M&E. You need to provide resources for it. You need to identify indicators, how you will monitor and how you will change if things need to be changed. Then documenting, analyzing, sharing those lessons, and redesigning future interventions. So you also need to have a way to provide the feedback loop for future activities. Now, many results have a long time lag, and we know this is a constant challenge. Researchers are not interested in finding answer to questions that you will find answers to, say, 10 years from now. So that's a challenge, and we have to struggle with the doing part, how to do it.
Yes, lack of financing was mentioned, and that is, of course, a problem. But I think it's important also to think about what we can do as individuals. And I see that very much in our young people in Sweden today. I mean, as I said, we're not paralyzed by all the issues that come with climate change. We try to find solutions to it. So it's really spurring innovation within the green transition. But attitudes are also very important, and realizing what role we play as individuals. So, for example, our consumption really matters. And somebody mentioned the fashion industry. It's an extremely polluting industry. And I can see in our young generation today that they actually think twice before buying a new pair of jeans because they know how much water and energy went into that process. They would rather buy vintage. And they like recycling. And the fun thing is that on weekends, actually, a lot of people meet at the recycling stations in Sweden, recycling batteries and glass and paper and whatever other waste you have. So that's actually the place where you meet people now. And you're not ashamed. You actually think it's quite fun. And you feel that you're doing something good. So we can all do something that actually does matter. Thank you.
This has been such an interesting conversation and hearing, I think, from all of the speakers, but the audience as well, and youth and students and teachers. And I think just going back to, there were a couple of questions about what can be done at the UN, how do we generate the synergies that we're talking about amongst the SDGs, and really events like the HLPF and like the site event. There are so many different events that anyone can learn from. They're educational experiences like this one has been. And attending something on sustainable transportation, and then climate change and food systems and education. We can all break out of our specific area of expertise and learn from others who are here, all of whom are advocating for the SDGs from different vantage points, but it's really a good opportunity to share knowledge, to make new partnerships. You find, oh, I'm doing something that's related to this issue, and this person in a different region is coming at it from a slightly different angle. There's a space for the synergies there that we could really partner up and tap into. So I encourage everyone to keep participating. The Summit of the Future is going to be taking place in September. There are action days on the Friday before the Summit of the Future, I think it's the 20th of September, dedicated to youth, and then on the Saturday dedicated to digital futures, peaceful futures, sustainable futures for all. And these are going to be spaces to have these conversations, really looking toward the future on what changes can be made. So please engage, register, and I hope to see many of you there.
Thank you so much to Astra for that final comment. As the moderator, the convener of this, I think it's just been such a terrific, stimulating conversation. Just to add my closing words on this, I think my response to this question of what should we be doing is very much I think represented here. The openness, right? The openness to go outside of your particular area of interest, a particular area of expertise. The openness to recognize that all of these things matter. You need action at the sort of capacity building level. You need the financing. You need the intersectoral engagement. You need sort of the like a whole society approach, as we often call it, right? And I think also how and I think also this question of social norming. I started thinking about this issue, as I mentioned at the beginning of the SDG agenda, and it was a very depressing year because, even though it was the 2015, I know lots of buzz around it, but I was just reflecting on all of these conversations around the Rio +20 and, how people were talking about how things have really changed in some ways on some things like recycling, but our fundamental way of doing business, our fundamental way of being has not changed. And I feel like, that sort of would always make me think that, well, as education people, we're always talking about behavior change, the individual, whereas the real problem lies with the people, some powerful individuals, right, often. So that was always my, pessimistic sort of point of view that how much can one person change? I mean, of course, we're all trying to change in some way. But I think what this panel taught me today is to just reflect on this in more of a positive approach, but also that all of these individuals come together to make the world, right? So it does mean that in Sweden, it didn't just happen with individuals made a difference over time to make a social norm happen. You do have like a lot of movements now on fashion, on meat consumption, what have you. So I think it is important to recognize both dimensions, right? That the powers that be, as well as the power that all of us have to lead on this issue of climate. And I just hope that you take from this event both, of course, the pragmatism, but also the hope that I hope you heard in the conversation and the interventions. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you. Yeah.